At CES earlier this month, Nvidia had unveiled and announced the RTX 50 series, a series of GPUs that's been highly anticipated by a lot of PC gamers and hardware enthusiasts. Initially, the RTX 5090 and 5080, so the top two cards in the stack, are set to be released on January 30th, and if you were looking to get your hands on these cards, well, I've got some bad news for you. I hope you like camping out in the freezing cold, and on top of that, being price gouged. Let's discuss that in this video.
Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video.
Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. We're just 10 days away from seeing the RTX 50 series graphics cards hit store shelves, and I know there have been a number of you guys that are eagerly waiting to get your hands on them. Recently on my community page, I ran a poll asking you guys if you are or were to buy an RTX 50 series GPU, which one would you get? And the results were actually quite surprising to me. The most popular card turned out to be the RTX 5090. Now, you guys are actually wild for this because most of the time we're often seeing comments and people expressive about how the 90 class is just way too expensive and that no gamer should be buying this card. It's meant for workstation users or professionals. And I mean, to be fair, it's not like this poll was restricted to just gamers, and I did say how for that professional segment, the 5090 is reasonably priced. But even so, I know most people following me are gamers, and it looks like people are willing to pay that much for the best of the best, even if it is just 30% better than a 4090. But then at second place, we've got the RTX 5070 Ti. And again, I thought that the 5080 was going to be second place here, but at $749, I can see why this GPU would be so appealing. First, it's got 16GB of VRAM, making it more appealing to gamers. And for the vast majority of gamers who are still gaming at 1080p and 1440p, this level of performance is still adequate. And I'm not even talking about with AI gimmicks, just pure raster. Then we've got the RTX 5080 at third place, and I can see why this one isn't as popular now because many were hoping it would have at least had 20GB of VRAM, or with the way its memory bus is spec'd, then 24GB if Nvidia had chosen to use the 3GB chips, as well as being a bit more closer in terms of the die specifications or the core count or SM shader count specification to the 5090. But as you guys can see from the specs, it's like half that and it's half the price. And when you look at its overall specs, it's not going to be reliably matching or beating an RTX 4090 as many were hoping. There might be some one-offs here and there where a certain game or application favors Blackwell, but most of the time it's going to be falling right behind, and I think people are disappointed by that. And then last, we have the RTX 5070, which has the least amount of interest amongst the audience I polled, just 11%. So Nvidia, that whole marketing charade where you guys were positioning the 5070 as matching the 4090 in performance, yeah, people have clearly seen through it. And ultimately, it's just looking like a 4070 Super with the ability to do multi-frame generation. But remember, we're just talking about how it'll do in terms of sales relative to the other SKUs. But overall, I think it's still going to sell out day one. Nonetheless, it's still interesting to see how the 5090 is coming out on top as the most popular choice, so the most expensive card amongst all of the people polled, and the cheapest card, the 5070, is the least popular. But speaking of sales, let's get into the main reason why I was prompted on making this video. This information comes from PC Games Hardware, or PCGH, a tech outlet based in Germany, and they have had one of their forum moderators by the name of Poker Clock, who is well respected within their community, share some very concerning information. The market launch of Nvidia's new graphics cards is imminent, and I was able to learn from well-informed dealer circles the available contingent of graphics cards will be extremely limited. This is especially true for the GeForce RTX 5090. According to this, Nvidia determines where and who exactly will offer graphics cards at market launch. Most likely, B2B dealers will come away empty-handed. As well, the entire local wholesale trade, which primarily serves business customers. This is a translation, so the wording is probably a bit off, but it seems like Nvidia will be enacting a tiered system for retailers, and based on that, it will determine who gets supply of the RTX 50 series and how much volume they'll receive. The good news is that B2B sellers will not be amongst those in the first wave of sellers, so just regular consumers, gamers, will have a shot at snagging one, rather than large corporations just gobbling up all the supply. Interestingly though, they also mentioned that all other retailers, including Amazon, will be served at best in the second, third, or even the fourth wave, and only weeks later or will act as resellers themselves with a significant price premium, according to Poker Clock. Which sucks because I know a huge chunk will shop for PC parts off of Amazon, but they could also just be referring to Amazon in Germany, and the situation in North America could be different. Now, as someone who's worked at one of the largest PC retailers here in Canada, and for a time I was working in receiving, from there I was able to form some contacts with folks who work for some big distributors in North America, and from what I've been told, the stock situation will be quite dire for us Canadians, and the vast majority of stock is going to go to the US. Man, honestly, sometimes I wish I lived in a place like Windsor or Sarnia so I could just drive like 30 minutes over the border and then get to the Micro Center in Michigan, but I live like 5-6 hours away, so that ain't happening. Unfortunately, if you were planning on getting an RTX 50 series in Canada, good luck. Seriously, from what I hear, only a select few Canada Computers locations will get some stock at launch, like we're talking about in the single digits, and most of that is for the 5080, with the 5090 being even more scarce. And if you are after a 5090, especially the Founders Edition, I know that a lot of people like that card because it's 2-slot, it's very sleek, that'll be like trying to spot a unicorn. You'll probably have a better chance at winning big playing Lotto Max or Lotto 649. Because only Best Buy Canada carries Founders Edition cards, and from what I've been told, they're not even going to have stock at all for the first week. The best you'll be able to do is put yourself on a queue just like how they did for the 9800 X3D and hope you get something allocated for your order. What's also somewhat disheartening to hear is that if you were hoping to get a card for MSRP, your best option, well your only option, is to get the Founders Edition model, which as I said is going to be next to impossible, but we're going to be circling back to that in a moment. Now, the info I was given was mostly pertaining to Canadian distribution channels, as that's what the roles are for, but I was also given some insight on availability for supply in the US, and it's also not looking too good. If you're fortunate enough to live by a Micro Center, then you're going to want to get out there and camp for an early spot. The same goes for those by a Best Buy, but for most of the people, they're gonna have to sit online spamming F5 on sites like Newegg.com, while at the same time battling the bots and scalpers. And yes, don't think for a second that scalpers don't have their sights locked on the 50 series. Most of the stock you'll see will be for the 5080, while the 5090 will be even harder to attain. Not just because the volume of that specific GPU is low, I mean we're talking about a 744mm square mammoth die, but as you guys saw from my poll, it'll be the most sought after GPU in the whole lineup. So just be prepared. If you're looking to buy a 50 series GPU on launch, it's going to be quite difficult. The situation also seems to get worse when we take a look at pricing. If you want to get a card at MSRP, your only option will be to go for an FE model, which as we just discussed will be a total mission on its own. It's not even going to be available at all retailers, and for the most part is only attainable in North America. So what that means is that most consumers are going to be paying prices that are considerably higher than MSRP because their only option is to go for an AIB model, which will have its own markup. Now, how much it's marked up over MSRP will depend on which model you go for exactly. As you guys probably saw from the various CES 2025 coverage, the AIBs will be bringing all sorts of different models. Like for example, MSI have their Ventus model, which is their cheaper model, typically closer to MSRP, but then they will also have their more higher end models like the Vanguard or Supreme, and they'll have a significant markup on those. It's the same thing with AIBs like Asus and Gigabyte. Asus has their Tough or Prime models, which are cheaper and more closer to MSRP, and now they've introduced an Astro model, which is their new premium design, replacing the Strix. According to recent reports, global pricing for the RTX 50 series AIB models is shaping up to be, well, insane. Nvidia has set an MSRP for the Founders Edition cards, but AIBs are throwing that number right out of the window. In Europe, some retailers have already leaked prices, and they are eye-watering. For instance, the RTX 5090 from big brands like Asus and MSI is listed above 3,000 euros for their flagship design. That's a massive leap from the MSRP and is likely to translate to even higher markups in North America, especially with the limited supply. It's also worth noting that lower tier AIB models like MSI's Ventus or Asus's Tough lineup will still command a decent markup. Canada Computers listed some RTX 5080s from AIBs, and after conversion for the direct MSRP, we should be seeing like $1,450 to $1,500, but even for the cheaper models like the Ventus, it's been listed at $1,700. So a $250 to $300 markup for even the cheaper models. So they're definitely significant, much higher than what we're accustomed to. And I think AIBs will start to take notes from Nvidia's page and have to innovate themselves rather than just enlarging their coolers, which would lead to an increase in cost. Like, I would much rather have seen some AIBs go passive on the power requirements themselves for some of the lower end models and apply like a factory undervolt and build a 2 or 2.5 slot card. I think a lot of people would still buy that. And to be honest, for my testing, and I don't know if this will apply to Blackwell, I'll have to test it, I've seen that undervolting and power limiting cards, you still get like 95% of the performance even if you were completely maxed out. So I think it's better to just undervolt these days. So while Nvidia's Founders Edition cards might seem like the best deal, their limited availability and exclusivity to certain regions makes them an unrealistic option for most people. For the average consumer, the real prices for the 50 series they'll face are whatever AIBs decide, and from the looks of it, they're catering to those with a serious amount of disposable income. It's certainly going to make reviews interesting because some reviewers will choose to focus on the FE MSRP of the 50 series versus the 40 series FE MSRP, but that isn't going to apply to most people. So if you're going to be reading or watching reviews because you're potentially picking up one of these 50 series cards, look carefully at your regional pricing and base your decision on that and what kind of model you're going to have to go after, the custom ones that is. Chances are you probably would get way better bang for your buck going with a 40 series GPU or even AMD on a clearance discount. So to wrap things up, the RTX 50 series launch is shaping up to be another challenging GPU release, and for once I was hoping we'd get a break from limited supply and pricing issues, but it looks like that trend is just going to keep continuing. Between limited supply, inflated AIB pricing, and the hurdles of finding Founders Edition cards at MSRP. It's clear that Nvidia's next-gen GPUs are not going to be accessible for most gamers at launch unless you're prepared to camp out in the freezing cold, pay scalper prices, which I do not recommend you do, or settle for a heavily marked up AIB model. It might be worth waiting this one out. Let the early adopters navigate this madness while the rest of us keep an eye on prices, availability, and hopefully some much needed competition from AMD, if at all. As always though, patience might just save you a lot of money and frustration. Alrighty guys, that's going to be doing it for this one. We'll touch base in the next video.
If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.